Welcome to the Two Wealth Show, a show that shares how you can create real wealth for you and your family. I'm one of your hosts, Justin Bogard, and my co-host is Elizabeth Sickles, aka Super E. I am a real estate note investor, specializing in performing residential real estate debt. I find the deals, acquire them for my own portfolio, as well as educate investors while walking them through the process of owning a real estate note. My co-host Super E, a real estate investor, specializing in short-term rentals and the management of them. She connects investors with short-term tenants and manages everything in between. Our show is sponsored by BrightPath Notes and Elizabeth Mayora. You can find out more information by visiting our websites at brightpathnotes.com and elizabethmayora.com.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome to episode number 20 of the Two Wealth Show with myself, Elizabeth, with Elizabeth Mayora.
Hey, everybody. I'm Justin Bogard with BrightPath Notes. Guess what?
Greetings on attorney Jeff Jinks.
There we go. Jeff knows right when to chime in. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for joining our show today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and look forward to talking with you and your audience.
Awesome. Well, we've been looking forward for this for a few episodes now. I'm glad our schedule is finally aligned. So,
yeah, definitely. Everybody's busy, so I'm here to talk as long as you'd like to and answer anything that you might want to talk about. We gave a few ideas beforehand, but normally when I'm talking with people, things tend to wander around a little bit. So that's good too.
Hey, can you give me some advice on this certain situation that has nothing to do with today? I'm just looking for free legal advice.
Off camera.
Yeah. How many times have you heard that?
I just have this one question.
That turns into 15 sub questions.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
So obviously the big thing on everybody's mind is what is going on with this CDC moratorium, and how does the Center for Disease Control have any authority to do this?
I love it.
Well, that's a big question. That's a really big question. And I honestly, the bottom line answer is that I really don't think they have the authority to do it. And the order that they issued is very contradictory. And the guidance that they provided, the declaration they provided, is very contradictory. And it doesn't really have any of the normal markers that we would have in a legislative act that make it easy to interpret or easy to enforce. So it's really a big mess, and it's just a big mess. And I don't think they have any authority to do what they've done. But when just like when the governor spoke, everybody just listened and, we have to follow this because the governor spoke. But when you start challenging it like we did in the lawsuit in federal court, that ended with a quick lifting of the eviction ban on the state level from the governor. So I'm hoping that, maybe some of the cases that are starting to percolate around the country will have the same result on the CDC level.
So just to back up for a second, for our audience that don't know a lot about the CDC moratorium, kind of in general, when did they put this in effect, just to get a time frame for this, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm going to reach into my magic box over here and grab the actual CDC order so that I can speak about it. I've got some other papers here too. But in my magic box, I have see how it comes through. The CDC order came down late August and then was effective September 4th. So that's the effective date of the moratorium. And I guess I would maybe even back up and help your audience a little bit more too. CDC stands for Centers for Disease Control. Maybe everybody knows that, but maybe not. It's under Health and Human Services. It's a part of the federal government. So the United States federal government in Washington, D.C., through this one agency, issued this order that says no evictions based on failure to pay rent. And they kind of restricted it just to that area until the end of the year. So December 31st. As you might remember, the governor kept re-upping his emergency authority every 30 days. And the federal government doesn't have that kind of limitation. So they just put it out to the end of the year, December 31st, unless it's extended again or some new order replaces it before that or after it. And, I think a lot of it, of course, is political, various motivations to garner favor, but it's a political order, I think, disguised as a public health measure. And I can go into that a little bit more too, if you like.
Yeah, no, sure. Thanks for kind of putting that out there, the intro, as far as what it is, when it got in effect, and kind of what they're doing. So this isn't just, this is state level and it's federal too, correct?
Well, the order comes from the federal government, but it applies to every state and every court in the country. So evictions really are a state court matter.
Okay.
So if you want to evict somebody, it's always in a small claims court in the state of Indiana or Marion County or Hamilton County or Johnson County.
Mm-hmm.
Those are state courts. And they're receiving this order from the federal government saying, oh, now what do we do next? And that's part of where the confusion lies. The premise of the order is that if people are evicted, then they are at risk of gathering together in clustered housing units that would more likely possibly spread COVID-19. That's the premise under it. But of course, the other aspect is that the order only applies if you don't pay rent. So if there's 10 other reasons that you could evict somebody other than non-payment of rent, that's okay, no public health crisis. But if it's a non-payment of rent, then it's a public health crisis. So it's, suspect to me and many others, I think, that the CDC issued this order. I don't think they have the authority to intervene in all the landlord-tenant contracts around the country. I don't think they have the authority to intervene in state court proceedings. I don't think they have the authority to take basically landlord's property and steal it from them and give it to tenants. I mean, it's wrong on 100 levels,
yeah.
But that's where we're at, right now until we get some more litigation.
So someone chooses not to pay rent, they would fall in this category of getting in the moratorium. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. So imagine if you have a tenant and your lease started on January 1st to December 31st, and they haven't been paying rent for a couple months, you would normally go and evict them for non-payment of rent. However, if they had a lease that started August 31st and ended August 31st of 2020, and so their lease was really over, you could evict that person because the lease is expired, not necessarily for unpaid rent, even though they weren't paying anyway. But right, so you could say, Your Honor, I want to evict them because this contract is over with. And or if there was a crime being committed, or there was destruction of property, or criminal activity was taking place, or some other term in your lease was being violated. There was too many people there, unregistered people that, not unregistered like illegal aliens, but you have a lease with a family and all those people are identified. So if you brought in new family members or outsiders and they're not on the lease, you could, force the lease to end or evict those people at least that are not on the lease. So that would be another aspect of it.
It's very interesting, especially when you dive into those details. And I'm just curious, I didn't think about it until we started, are there any moratoriums or any guidelines around commercial property, Jeff?
No, it's only residential is the only thing that we're dealing with right now. Commercial leases are being enforced, and you can evict people or businesses for non-payment of their commercial lease. And ostensibly, that's because if you move the business, it doesn't matter to COVID, right? So, but they're worried about the policy is trying to protect people from losing a home, and then being forced into a less desirable housing circumstance that might create a infection problem, all of which are, speculative at the
Right.
best, let alone, whether they're really true or not. Those are very, very interesting aspects.
Can you talk a little bit about the lawsuit that you filed on the state level? And I thought it was really interesting that you referenced the Magna Carta. And can you just talk about what that process is like and some of the things that you did reference? Because I think maybe sometimes people think, oh, well, you just file a lawsuit, but I'm sure it's a lot more in depth than that.
Yeah, it was pretty it's pretty intense, and thank you for giving me the chance to talk about that. And I would really want to emphasize that it was a team approach. I mean, we had 4 lawyers working on that, including a law professor that only does constitutional law. And we were gathering documents from all over the country from other lawsuits and seeing what other lawyers were doing with the eviction bans in those states and what governors had said. And so you were comparing a particular governor's order, for instance, in Michigan or California or Illinois, to what our governor had said. And then you were looking at the statute that the governor was operating under and comparing the language of their statute with their order, and then comparing that over here to Indiana's statute and the emergency powers that were happening, and then looking at the underlying constitutional provisions and saying, how do all of these play together, and how do they, in our view, and I think rightly so, violate the federal constitution, and then whether Indiana constitution was also violated, because Indiana has its own constitution, and it has many of the same provisions that the federal constitution has, or similar. They title them differently and the wording is slightly different, but most of the protections are similar, if not greater, in Indiana than on the federal level. So you have to wind all of that together. We made a reference, excuse me, to the Magna Carta, and unless you're a law nerd like you, Elizabeth, right, you probably never even think of who knows about the Magna Carta. That's like from the year like 1216, seriously, 800 years ago. In England, the king was forced to sign the Magna Carta, which is called the Great Charter. Magna, it's Latin. And basically all the nobility who were the rulers under the king said, look, we have these rights and you can't take them away. And there's a famous painting and a famous event that in London, there's a place called Runnymede, which is a giant park, right? Basically a lawn, a park. And they had the king there, and they had him at the point of the sword and are like, you're going to sign this or we're going to kill you. And you're going to affirm our rights. And they had all these different rights of Englishmen that then kind of bled over to the American Constitution when we created ours. One of them being, you cannot take property from us without paying us a fair compensation. And all of the interesting, cool thing about that is that's our Fifth Amendment takings clause. So anybody that's had their land taken by a road widening, NDOT or something like that, that's because in 1216, the lords put their boot on the neck of the king and a sword to his neck and said, sign or die. And he signed. And this right of property is so fundamental that it's persisted. And it is the only, unbelievable, there's like 39 different rights in Magna Carta. It is the only right still on the books in England today that was part of Magna Carta. It's that powerful, that deep, wow, that important, that fundamental. It's bedrock. You can't steal our property and confiscate it for yourself, king, which is what the governor, which is what the CDC is doing, without paying us a fair compensation, fair market value, and whatnot, and going through a process for it. So when we were doing that, and we put that in there, and I kind of looked it up. I did, double check. I'm like, well, this is kind of amazing. But literally, it is the only right. There's maybe two others, but 2 or 3 rights out of 37 or 39 in the Magna Carta are still literally on the statute books in England today. None of the others, they've all been absorbed in different areas or whatever. Not to say that they weren't important, but blow me away. Unbelievable.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks for bringing that up, Elizabeth.
Yeah, no doubt. That's going to take us. That's why we need extra time today. We use as much time as we need.
I feel like we just went back to Braveheart days.
Yeah, we did. No, seriously, we did. Love it.
Man.
So that's Magna Carta. That's what was happening in that lawsuit, all the different statutory provisions and constitutional things.
Wow. So is there anything in that moratorium that relates to mortgages?
No, it's only leasing, landlord-tenant. And I say that, and as soon as the words like pop out of my mouth, I would tell you that there are members of the tenants bar and sort of some civil rights advocates that believe that this CDC moratorium would apply to both land contracts and rent to own lease options type of scenarios, where once and really focusing on the ownership part of it, they're trying to drag all of that into just a straight up landlord tenant provision. And so those lawyers are advising other members of the bar and judges and whatnot to try to, bring all of that into this CDC moratorium, even though really it's explicitly about non-payment of rent.
And I believe that to be true as well. That's what I don't like about land contracts, is that it always puts you in the middle of being a landlord or being a note holder. Even though you're a note holder, but you still have those, you're on the deed, which is what I don't like to be on land contract. And then I'm a hypocritical guy that still buys them, There's some good deals out there, right? But anyway, yeah, that's always, Elizabeth's heard my shtick on that for years about just convert to a note mortgage or write a note mortgage from the beginning. So,
no, there's a lot of merit to that, and it does create confusion. And as much, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, but as much as you would think it's obvious that a land contract is not a lease, it is not obvious. And the way they're implemented, the way they're applied, the way they're written, the way, different parties set the deal up, it can look a lot like a lease.
Yeah.
And so that's where it becomes confusing and difficult for judges to interpret and implement this stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I remember, I know we're getting off track a little bit, but every land contract I see, it's never a uniform land contract. It's always some really different language in there. When somebody like me that actually reads them because I want to understand what I'm buying or what I'm creating. Yeah. And it is very interesting how they're not uniform and they're completely different. Some are 1 page and some are 15 pages.
And really, what's on those pages is different.
Yeah, it's different. Anyway, sorry, I shoot down a ladder, but thanks for clarifying all that and tell us what could happen with as it relates to note investing as well.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead, Elizabeth. Sorry.
No, that's why it's so important, because you might think, oh, well, I'm not a landlord, this doesn't apply to me, but look at what Jeff just explained on how this is going out to land contracts, and it's all encompassing. So all of our real estate investors and our housing providers out there really need to be on top of this stuff. And also with the elections coming up, if you're voting for judges, make sure you know what their stance is and what their record is.
That's a really good point, Elizabeth.
So if I could, I'd like to segue for just a second to a hearing that we had a week ago in one of the small claims courts on the CDC moratorium, and explain a little bit more of what's the fact pattern, what happened there, and also how it applies, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. So under the moratorium, in order for the moratorium to even apply, a tenant has to sign an affidavit. It's called a declaration. And at the end of this order that came out right back at the end of August, there's a form that the CDC wrote, and they said, here's a sample, but it could be anything else. But if you can use this sample, and if the tenant signs it and gives it to the landlord, not even the court, but they give it to the landlord, then they can't be evicted. And what has happened is that not every landlord knows about this declaration. Not every court even knows about it.
Wow.
And then some of the courts are actually giving this out in court. So a week ago, we had a hearing, and the judge, Graves in Marion County Small Claims Court, Warren Township, I just tell you the facts. I'm not disparaging him at all. But, he, at the beginning of his docket, read the whole CDC moratorium into the record and told every tenant what they needed to do in order to not get evicted, which I think is improper for a judge to, well, it is improper, to take an advocacy position for one side or the other and help them, help them.
Yeah.
And actually provide those forms and tell them, what to do with it. So he does that at the beginning of his eviction docket. And then what we did was a tenant signed that, and we thought the tenant was not truthful. So we asked for a hearing and said, Your Honor, we think that this is wrong. We want to object to this declaration because once they give it to us, we have to stop the eviction. So we wanted to make it a record so that we could go up on appeal or hopefully win at the trial court level, and this eviction could go forward by saying the moratorium doesn't apply, the declaration is false, don't let them get away with it, basically. And we had probably a 30-minute argument where we went through point by point this declaration, and really 3 out of the 7 points, and said, this tenant does not qualify for number 1, number 3, and number 4. And we presented evidence, documented evidence, why that was true. And the tenant didn't even show up for this hearing, which is another kind of bizarre, but the court was like giving them deference to it. It's like, well, I believe everybody. That's what he said. I believe everybody. I'm like, well, you can until you are presented with like additional evidence to decide whether they're, lying or just not being fully truthful. And Judge Graves wanted us to, he wanted to kick it out of his court. He wanted to say, look, your remedy here is to go to the federal government and complain to them, or you can try to get the attorney general to prosecute for perjury, which is never going to happen, right? He just wanted it out of his court. And we're like, no, you still have to deal with this.
Yeah.
You have to deal with whether or not this person is being truthful. And one of the points was that, I'm going to read it here real quick, just make sure I say it exactly right from the document. And this is why this is so poorly written, and I get so angry about government, and writing statutes are terrible.
Your face is getting red right now.
So it says, I certify. Yeah. So the first thing is that the tenant has to say, I've used quote unquote best efforts to obtain all available government assistance for rent or housing. Well, what does best efforts mean? A. What does all available government assistance mean? B. And what we proved is that he didn't apply for any government assistance. His wife did, but his wife's not on the lease. And his wife, the response was, you make too much money. Your income went up during COVID, so you don't qualify. So you don't get any of the government assistance. So we know that he applied, or his wife applied for one. So we just said, look, he doesn't qualify. Step one, he hasn't applied for any others. He hasn't gotten any others. There's utility programs. There's township trustee, all has money. There's all different kind of government programs that are out there, but he didn't apply for any of them. His wife applied for one and was denied. So I said, strike one, you lose. But terrible language. The next one that he failed on was, I'm unable to pay my full rent due to substantial loss of household income. Well, that's false, like I just said. So he failed it on two different counts. His income went up, so he loses, right? And the next one, I'm using best efforts, I don't know what that means, to make timely partial payments. Well, he made no payments.
Right.
So we're like, Your Honor, he hasn't made a payment since May. It's now almost November. There's nothing that's been paid. That is not best efforts. That's not timely. I don't care. He didn't even pay $1, right? So we went through all those, and the judge was getting a little testy with me. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, it was a Zoom call like this. And so all the lawyers in the room could hear what's being argued about. And I'm getting a phone call from a lawyer that says, I do 600 evictions a month. You're the first lawyer that has attacked this CDC thing. All of our clients are afraid to do it. Yeah. They just won't attack it. Yeah, I know. I'm like, why not? Why aren't you guys objecting every single time? Well, our clients don't want to. I'm like, well, you got to. You have to object. Even if you lose 600 times, you got to do it and take it up on appeal sometime. So that's what's happening. Judge Graves, it was the first time. I know it's only been out there 5 weeks or whatever, but it's hundreds of cases, and he's leading his whole docket with the idea of giving these papers out to people. And lots of others said, other lawyers and other litigants said, yeah, just give me the paper, I'll fill it out, and it's just going to be continued till January. So it's just staggering to me that landlords have allowed themselves to be steamrolled like that. So we'll see what the ruling is and go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for sharing all that. That was great information and a great factual information that you've experienced and you've been a part of. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's frustrating.
It does sound like it.
And one thing I don't think people that are thinking about, at some point you have to pay the piper, right? And so me as a landlord, like we're getting ready to put up a property as a long-term, as a traditional rental. Well, my criteria just increased. My security deposit has increased. So the tenant is going to have more to pay because we have to make sure if they do something ridiculous like this again, that my client, the landowner, that he's covered, he or she is covered. So I don't think they're thinking about that.
No, they're not. They're not thinking through it at all. And of course, they're also building up, 4 months or 5 months worth of non-payment of rent for all these tenants, saying, oh, you're going to have to pay it, but they're not going to be able to. And so it's an incentive really for the landlords to go ahead and try for the damages. And when they get up that high, they're incentivized to do it, which is going to be a collection problem and a credit worthiness problem for tenants going forward. So it's really, it seems like the government wants to be friendly, but they're not, and they're creating a bigger problem than existed. And the numbers of evictions just are not the catastrophe that has been played out in the media, the 30 and 40,000, evictions or hundreds of thousands that were going to happen. It's just completely false. We knew that. We've said it before. And it's the fact is most people pay the rent, and most people have been able to. The unemployment is not even that low. I mean, it's, we're not even that high. It's a pretty good economy, all things considered, and people are paying their rent. So it's really frustrating to see how that's playing out. So I 100% agree with you. It's got a lot of unintended consequences.
And I just want to make sure too that our audience, whether you're watching this or if you're listening to us, that you also know that Jeff is the attorney for the Indiana State Real Estate Investors Association. So he's just such a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate all you do for all of us housing providers and investors. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. It's my pleasure, my honor. This is our total focus of our business, is representing investors, housing providers, residential, commercial, whatever, developers. And, we see how it impacts everybody, and it's got a trickle down effect from just every aspect of the business and the industry. So we're honored to be part of it. We really love this type of client that we work with. That's why we devoted our practice that way a number of years ago, and it's just been, it's a lot of fun. We like landlords. I love my landlord.
That's
if
right.
I can borrow
Hashtag.
a phrase.
That's right. We're still doing that.
Hashtag,
right.
I love my. Yeah.
That's right. This is kind of a fun aside. I was telling the guys before we started, I have a political sign of a candidate, anyways. And then I also have the I love my landlord sign right beside that at my personal property. And they left the I love my landlord sign, but they stole my other one. But I'm going to take care of that.
I thought you were defacing your property with the candidate.
yeah, I guess.
I love it.
Jeff, what kind of advice can you give to our audience on just on everything that's going on, and especially with the elections, coming up? Just what can they do, no matter where they are as a housing provider, or if they're wanting to get into the real estate market? What would you tell them?
Well, there's number one. I would say stay in it for the long haul. This is a big market. Housing is a essential industry. Real estate's an essential industry, has been shown even during COVID. And there's really a lack of housing. There's not enough housing out there, and we need more people coming into the industry providing housing. I look at the stats that we see every month on values of property, and they're going up. Part of that's a little bit of inflation, but a lot of it is driven by demand and a lack of supply. And so I think that all the different kinds of housing that we can provide, we need just more of everything, basically. More single family, more duplex, more multifamily, more apartments, more everything. We don't have near enough, and we need investors to pool their money, I think, and not just think what can they do on a one-off, but say, hey, let's get 10 of us together and build some houses somewhere, or build a small development, or build an apartment or something like that. And, pool your resources, get partners, and do more together rather than only by yourself. I'm not criticizing your own individual efforts, but I'm just saying there's a huge need of housing in the economy. And we really just need more of it. So, pour it on, because there's not enough. That means rents are rising everywhere except for the places people are fleeing in San Francisco and Seattle and, some of these other markets in Chicago that are just, they don't seem to understand supply and demand in those places. I don't get it. So just see what happens. But we need, all those investors are coming to Indiana, right?
They are.
All the West Coast is coming to Indiana and the Midwest because things are more stable here, and much better legal environment, much better pricing, much better housing ratios for the income to rent or income to mortgage, income to notes. Justin, right? They can be private note investors and be buying in great cap rates compared to the rest of the country. And so that would be my advice. It's always a buy on the sound of cannon, right? That's JP Morgan, the banker hundreds of years ago also. Just, when you see these kind of crazy scenarios, it's a buying opportunity, and this market is just going to be stronger and stronger, I think.
Wow, Jeff, that was probably one of the best closing statements we've had since we've been doing this podcast together. Great job. And we're very fortunate to have you as legal counsel for our state RIA. Thanks for all the time that you put in, the bonus time that you put in without any consideration. So thank you for that as well. So Jeff,
you're welcome.
How can people get a hold of Jeff Jinks Law, and what type of law is your specialty so that we can direct people your way? And how would they get a hold of it, like through your website or through an email?
Yeah, the website would be the best. There's a contact us button on the website, and somebody get out of the way, right? So there's the Jeff Jinks Law, and just put that in, and then law.com, and contact us, or they can call us on the phone, and we'll set up a free conference call. The phone number is 317-810-1400, and I do constant phone conferences with people. Even if there's not a good case, we talk through it and try to give people direction. And then if they hire us, great. If there's not a case, then we just move them on to some other solution. So there's lots of different things we can do, and there's no cost for that or no obligation either.
The real estate law is the law that you promote the most?
Yes, all of our clients, I guess I want to say it this way, our positioning statement is that unlike other law firms that tell you what they do, we define ourselves by the people we represent, and those clients are real estate investors. And so whatever a real estate investor needs, that's where we get involved in. A lot of times it's transactional, sometimes it's business entity work, sometimes it's estate planning, because they start to feel their way through and say, wait a minute, now what happens if I were to have a tragedy? I need this to make sure that my family's taken care of. So we cover all of that, tax work, zoning work, all kinds of things, but litigation, if things go bad, partnerships go bad, or we put them together one way or the other. So it's really a wide ranging practice that's lots of fun, focused only on real estate investors. Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff. Once again, that's jeffjinkslaw.com, correct?
You got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Elizabeth, we're definitely out of time. This has been a fantastic episode, number 20, with no other than Mr. Jeff Jinks from Indianapolis.
Great. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate the time. Have a good day.
All right, everybody. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channels at brightpathnotes.com. I'm sorry, Brightpath Notes YouTube channel. There's my blooper for today. And then Elizabeth Mayor's YouTube channel as well. So I'm Justin Bogard with Brightpath Notes.
I'm Elizabeth with Elizabeth Mayora.
All right, everybody. Until next time. See ya.
Thanks, everybody.
The Two Wealth Show is produced by Justin Bogard and Super E, sponsored by Brightpath Notes and Elizabeth Mayora. Thanks for listening and watching for our show.